So we're back. It's been a while since I've made an actual work video on Project Blue, and largely that's been because I've had a lot of things waiting for other people, body parts waiting for paint, motor parts waiting for customization, and those things are coming to an end. And I also needed to make some decisions about some other things I was going to do with the bike. Anyway, one thing that it had when I got it was basically new front suspension. The fork tubes had to be replaced when it was put back together. So my fork tubes are in really good shape. They're nice and straight. I've measured them on a dial indicator to see they don't have anything other than normal, wear and tear from very low mileage. I could just see some service bars, so I'm going to end up just giving them a good polish and calling the tubes fine. I did already replace the factory springs with progressive springs as a way to kind of stiffen up the front end a little bit. The original springs are quite a bit spongy to my taste, and these are fine. They're good for banging around a little bit before I got into tearing apart the bike. And but as I was going through the project, I was thinking, what can I do to improve this without changing too much about the front end? And that got me over onto Race Tech. So Race Tech makes cartridge emulators, which will give it a much more modern feel. And so I've picked up some Race Tech Gold emulators. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to do the work to get them ready to install. Maybe by the end of the day, I'll get the tubes and everything put back together, and then we can put them aside for when we get the bike put back together. But I want to get this off the bench and see how we do. So with the emulators, you get the emulator itself, various spacers and valve bits. You also get a well, if you buy everything that you're going to need for a project like this, you'll get another set of springs that are they're a different length, a good amount different length than the factory springs or the progressive springs. And there's a spacer that you have to cut down to size. This is just a PVC tubing that, when we get to that point, we'll measure this down to the right size. We'll have to set the appropriate damping on the spring. This system comes with multiple different springs. The configuration that I put in, I'm going to use the blue spring, which I think is the middle spring. But you have stiffer and softer springs that you can put in if your riding style changes, if weight conditions change, whatever's appropriate. The Race Tech system seems a bit complicated at first. When you get it, you tell them information like any good suspension place. You tell them the kind of riding you're going to do, the kind of bike it's going to be on, how much you weigh, if it's relevant, how much you're adding to the bike. And in this case, I'm adding a little bit of weight to the front of the bike. So that increased the amount of loaded weight that the front suspension is going to have. Just a touch, but figured it was worth putting in the calculation. And so they come up with a configuration sheet that you get. When you get these, you'll get a code that you can use one time, and it'll spit out a bunch of customized instructions for your configuration exactly. That tells you important things like, what spring to use, how much preload, the number of bleed holes that you're going to need. I need 3, and it looks like these already have 3, so I don't need to add any. How much oil, etc. And there's a fairly detailed set of instructions on getting the springs or getting the cartridges installed and set up right. Some specific instructions, in this case for BMW, and some modifications that we're going to have to do. And also for down the line when we get the springs installed, how to set the preload on the springs and determine the right length of the spacer. So all in all, it's quite a bit of a busy project, but I think I can knock it out in a day or two spare time. We'll see how we go. Oh, and um, you get you could wallpaper a small bathroom with the number of stickers that they like to send you. That's amusing, but I'll use one or two of them here or there. We'll see. All right, so the part that we have to modify is the dampening rod itself, because when you put the emulators on, you are changing the way the internals of the fork handle dampening. So the dampening rod lives at the bottom of your fork. This part mounts to the bottom of your stanchion at the very bottom. So this is where, if you're, this is one of the places where this is where it hooks into the lower fork stanchion. And there is one, in this case, 8mm hole that serves as the dampening port for the dampening rod. There's others, sometimes there's two or three, but I think this one has one more at the top that is hidden by this spring that just sort of controls the rate that the fluid, the fork oil, can move through the entire system. And that just means that it tightens up and dampens the amount of bouncing that happens with the spring action. But with the cartridge emulators, all of that control over fluid motion happens at the emulator. So we need to open up more ports on the bottom in order for that to work. So that's going to mean adding some additional holes. So the one that I have here is 8. That's what RaceTech calls for. So that one's good to go. But I need 6 of them. So I will end up drilling this through completely, and then adding 4 more ports above it at very specific spots. So yeah, let's get to marking that out. Okay, so we're ready to lay out what we need to do with the emulators, or to install the emulators. And first, it's going to be dealing with the dampening rods that I have from factory. And we need to add one additional hole through this bottom port, which will be easy enough. We'll just line that up and go straight through. But we also need to add at 10mm on center and 90 degrees off, we need to add an additional through port that'll be 8mm all the way through, straight through the dampening rod. And then again, in line with the original, what will then be 2, another 10mm up, will go through the entire dampening rod. So we need to figure out exactly where that is going to be. Now on mine, I'm not going to remove this part, this foot off the bottom. It appears to be threaded on. I did a little bit to see if it would come off with any kind of ease. I applied a little bit of heat, and I think that what I ended up needing to do is damaging this part in order to get it to remove. It appears that the top and bottom of this are just threaded on with what appears to be a relatively fine thread inside here. And I'm not going to mess with that because I have a really good location of this first hole, and that'll give me a good starting point. It is just about a hair off. It's centered about it with just a tiny bit of a gap from the top of this. So that'll give me a good spacer. Since I know that's an 8mm hole, what I can do is simply add half of that to the distance I want to go. So that makes me take this to 14. And that'll get me the on center point for the next hole. And it needs to be 90 degrees off or thereabouts. So I will line that up more or less at 90 degrees. And we'll make a scribe mark. Which I will then just mark with a Sharpie so that it's easier to find. Okay, so the next thing I need is another 10 millimeters. So we are at 14. Going to go out to 24. And this one we will line up with the existing port. And get myself a locating mark there. Okay, so that's that one. We'll do this one the same, and I've close enough to the same situation here. Okay, so I've set this up so that my drill bit lines up pretty much perfectly with the existing port. And I'm going to drop a little bit of oil in the bottom. Set my speed. Set my 0. And we should be good to go. All right, I call that close enough. That'll do it. Okay, over to the vise where I am going to chuck these up and do a quick deburr. Back in a minute. All done, or at least with the modifications. So the original hole is here, and you can see that the factory did do a nice countersink operation to take the edge off. So I did the same thing with my additions. You can see that I ran these through a little bit of a countersink to get them done. Could not do it on the yeah, so this was the first hole, original, straight through to the other. So the drill came in from the inside on this one. I don't have a countersink tool that can do this without taking the end off. And again, like I said, I wasn't going to fight with that. So I just use a file and a little bit of polishing to smooth this one out, but they all feel nice and smooth. So I could put those back in. Same with this one. Filing is not quite as nice on this, but the rest of them turned out just fine. And let's see if we can get a good shot of the bore there. And let's take a look down this one too. There we go. So give them a nice clean. And those are ready for the next step. All right, move these aside and think about these guys. So we have to set the preload on the valving spring here. And according to my worksheet, I need 3.5 turns, and double check it also says that I need three bleed holes. So 1, 2, 3, and I've got a beginning of one that has not been drilled through. Suppose they do that in case I need to add one hole that, but I don't. So the one thing that I will say that I don't like about these is they are imperial measurements on the hardware. So this is between a 3 and a 4 millimeter, which I'm sure is maybe like a 1/4 inch. I don't have 1/4 inch Allen keys, but I do have stars. So these star bit Allen keys do work. Similarly, this is not a 9 millimeter, but a 9 millimeter is going to work. So we're going to back this out. All right, so what I need to do is I need to take up the slack in this. Until there is just no motion. Almost there. Not quite. All right, I'm going to say that is just touching. So I need to go 3.5 from there. Give myself a starting point. 1, 2, 3. Call that 3.5. All right, so that one is good. Do the same thing over here. All right, so these guys are set. Okay, I think we're to the point of getting things back into fork tubes. I do want to polish up the fork tubes a little bit more because they're not quite done. Get them clean on the inside out. So I will take a break and get that done, and we'll resume once this is ready to get back into all of the larger components. It's at a point where we can actually begin to reassemble the forks. We have our modified damping rods. We have our polished up tubes, cleaned the inside and out. Everything has been cleaned, reassembled a bit. So we've got to get some things back together. One thing that is a bit tedious is getting these Teflon seals installed correctly. And for that, I've got this Boxer 2 valve copy of a BMW tool, which basically creates a sleeve where we could slide the dampening rod in. The issue is that there's a step inside the fork that is machined in, and this seal rides inside the groove like that. And as you insert it, it's basically impossible to get the thing in without a special tool, because it pops out of its little channel here, and that means it's just never going to go in completely. So this tool, slide half in like that. Get your seal into the groove and use the other half of the tool to more or less hold it in place. I put it close to the step where I know it's going to get in the right neighborhood of what I want when I get to that step, and slide it in. So once you get it that far, just gently walking it in. If you get a bit of binding that doesn't want to clear, back it up. Let's make sure everything is fine. You don't want binding, because that means the seal might not be where it's supposed to be. Take it out, make sure the seal is still good. It is. And we will put it back in. start over. There we go. That's what it's supposed to feel like. Put that in. I'm going to check with the light to make sure I don't have a seal floating around in here that I don't want. And I don't. I just see the step and that top spring. So we're good. All right. Snap rings in. And one thing I always do with my snap rings like this, once they're in, I spin them. When you spin them, you want to make sure that you pay attention to what side you're doing. So if right now we've got one eyelet, say call it 1 o'clock, one at 11 o'clock. If I try to move the 1 o'clock eyelet clockwise, it's actually going to increase the tension on the snap ring. It's not going to want to spin. It's very hard to do. But if I try to do counterclockwise, it releases tension from the spring just enough that the spring can rotate. Say the opposite is true for the other side. It will only want to go the direction of the brake. So, yep, those look good. Looks good. Freshly modified, reinstalled fork. All right. Let's do the other one. Okay, that looks good. That looks good. Gentle rocking back and forth. We're in. Insertion tool out. And I do not see any floating Teflon seals. So we're good there. Let's pop that in. Shim spacer. Snap ring. Snapped into place. Once again, towards the brake, no problem. Towards the brake, no problem. We can see we're in. Good motion, nice modified damping rod. Good to go. All right. So now it's time to cut the spacer. And that requires a lot of calculation, or a bit of calculation, because we need to know a number of things. Take these out. All right, so we have our fork tube, and what we need to figure out is how much space is left after we put all of the components in, and figure out the distance from where the bottom of the cap nut, or the, as BMW calls it, the retaining nut, retaining pin, retainer, spring retainer. So we need to figure out the distance between the bottom of the spring retainer and the top of the spring, so we know how long to cut the spacer. Now on these forks, there is a groove which holds a snap ring. One of these guys. That snap ring holds this into place at that location, because the spring will be pushing up from the bottom inside the fork tube. So this will be pushed up towards the top. The snap ring in that groove prevents this from coming out of the tube. So what we need to know is the distance from this difference in diameter on the retainer to the bottom, and that's just about 12 millimeters. Also need to figure out the thickness of the snap ring, which is 2 millimeters. So we have 4.5, 2, so 6.5, 12, 18.5 millimeters. The next thing we need to do is, with all of the components in the fork, including the 2 spring washers that they give you that will go on either side of the spacer, we need to know the distance from the top of the fork tube. So on this one, I'm getting 62.3. What's interesting is on this one, I was getting 59.5. So I took everything back out. I didn't take apart the whole fork tube. Made sure that the tubes are the same length, made sure that the damping rod extends to the same length, made sure the distance to the top of the damping rod with nothing in it was the same. So the BMW parts were all dimensionally accurate. What I found when I took out the Racetech parts is that one of my springs is slightly longer than the other. I'll go ahead and cut the spacers, but I'm going to email them and see if that's an issue. It shouldn't be. It's 1.8 millimeter is the difference. So I have them marked for long and short, and I have 2 different measurements for spacers to cut. So that's what we're going to have to do. To get to this, here's what I did. Never mind all this chicken scratch. So 18.5 millimeters is what we wound up with for the cap height, the bottom of the cap from the top of the tube. It's going to be a little bit of fudging in that because this won't be perfectly 2 millimeters just because it's hitting on a tangent. Probably be just a touch larger than 18.5, but I think this is close enough given the situation. So we measure the distance from the top of the fork to the top of the spring, top of the tube to the top of the spring, 62.3. Subtract all of the distance that's going to be taken up by the cap nut, which gets us to 43.8. I need to preload the spring 20 millimeters, which means I need a spacer of 63.8. For the short one, a spacer of 61. So we need to get to that now. The spacer tube that they send is just this plastic pipe. I'm not sure if this is actually PVC. Okay. All right. Gave myself a little bit more of a score. Yes, and so what I'm noticing is the blade will catch on that spot. So we wanted 62.3. Or sorry. So, right. Okay, and we're done. So one short, one long. I just dressed these a bit with some sandpaper. Deburred the inside a little bit because it was a little bit gummy. And yeah, I think that's that. So I've got the cartridge adapter, that little spacer on the bottom already in here. I've got the cartridge in here. Got the spring. On top of the spring I have one steel washer, and it gets one more on top, and that will give me 20 millimeters of compression, which should equate to about 1.5 millimeters of protrusion at the top. I'm coming up just a touch shy than that, I could see. But again, I don't think these are within 0.5 millimeter of accurate to begin with. So yeah, these are good to go. I will need to find a way to compress this easily while putting the retainers in. I've cleaned these up and replaced the O-rings on them. So what you do with these now is you press them in, give them some compression, and then while they're under compression, you install the snap rings, which is fun. Last time I did that on these, I did it in my garage from the top, and that was one frustrating job. Let's look at this one. Yeah, I had about the same. This one's a tiny bit more proud, but again, I think we're good. I'll get just about 20 millimeters of preload on these. Get them buttoned up. They'll be good to go. After wrapping up the previous part of the video, I decided to go ahead and finish assembling the tubes. That meant getting it into a block and compressing the springs with my hydraulic press so that I can install the snap ring at the top. This is a tedious process that takes 3 or 4 hands if you don't have a press, but I include this photo just so you can kind of see how I went about doing it. and it's pretty quick this way. Next time I do it, I'll get some video.